Hello, my name is LoG, and welcome to another edition of LoG Power-Ups. Today's power-up will have a part that contains multiple individual moving melodies, or what I like to call multi-melodies. Let's first listen to what this power-up sounds like. This power-up will be split into parts 1, 2, and 3, and at the end of each video, you'll find a backing track that gradually increases tempo for you to play over. Once you have all the parts down, look out for the final video where you will run the entire thing along with a backing track that, again, increases tempo. If you guys enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below. And now let's get started with part 1. Okay, so I'm going to start this power-up by simply playing the part, and you can kind of see what is happening just by myself. So here's just part 1. Okay, so the whole idea behind this power-up is to make sure that we are playing a part with multiple individual and audible melodies that we can hear and follow as the part goes. So we're going to walk through the process of how to do this, how to put it together if you want, and why it's really cool and why it's sometimes a better choice than some other things. So if I play this part, there are 3 lines happening, and I'll sing all of them individually. So the top one sounds like that. I'll play that one. I'll sing it. So that's the most obvious one. It's on the top, right? Then the other one is the bass line, the bottom. Right? So I'll sing that one. Right? And then the middle line is this one kind of hidden in between. That sounds like this. Right? So I'm going to play all those. Okay, so all of those melodies, every time you hear that part, you should lock in on a note and be able to follow that note through its natural melody that happens afterwards. It's a really cool idea, and it's not as complex as it might seem to put it together. So we're going to talk about how to do it. With this part, or really with any part like this, it comes from 2 things, or 2 paths. You either have a chord progression that you really like, or you have a melody that you really like. So for me, the melody was the first thing that happened for me. And it was just this. I'm just walking down what feels like a B minor scale, right? Just walking down, right? Really simple. So the natural thing would be like, well, if that's B minor scale, so B minor chord should work with that. That's true. But you could also try with some other chords and get some cool, options like that as well. But the second thing that I did was I thought, I've got a melody. Now, when do I want the chords to change? And I decided I wanted the chords to change every 2 notes. So that would be like this. Here's the melody. All right, scale walking down. I want the chords to change here. Chord, 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 chord. So that means for every pair of notes, I need a chord change. So then I just thought, okay, let me look at each pair of notes. So how about the first 2? What chord has those notes at least are in the chord or functioning over the chord, right? So I thought, well, B minor is perfect, right? Starts off the song or the little piece pretty well. And those notes function over the chord. This would be flat 3, 2 of B minor, right? I thought, perfect, okay. How about the next 2 notes, right? Or how about here? Same 2 notes. I thought, well, that I'm going down with the melody, so maybe I could go down with the chord as well. This is B minor. If I go down, it would be A major. It feels like a 6 to a 5, right? I thought that works pretty well. Do those notes function over an A chord? Yeah, that's 2 and 1 of A, already pretty easy. So flat 3, 2 of B minor, 2, 1 of A minor, all totally cool. Next 2 notes of the melody, these 2, and I thought that looks like it fits perfectly in an E minor chord, which would be like a 2 chord in this key. So far we have 6, 5, and 2. And do those notes work over E minor? Yes, that's flat 3 and 2. Sounds cool. Then the last 2 are these 2, and that's it kind of naturally feels like maybe B minor should be happening right there, and that would work. Right, that's 4 flat 3 of B minor. That's cool, but I thought I want to save the B minor for the last chord, the last hit, so I can end here, right? B minor with a 2 on top, which is very cool sounding. So I wanted to save the B minor for the last hit. So I thought, it'd be perfect to do a setup chord to get into the B minor, something I've talked about in some of my other videos. So the best setup chord in this case, maybe not the best, but the most obvious is B minor's 5. So if this is B minor, it's 5 of, starts right there on F sharp, power chord up. So F sharp dominant 7, which fits perfectly with this melody because the melody is here, right? It's playing these two notes. What would these two notes be over F sharp? That'd be, it's flat 7, sharp 5. Flat 7, and then moving down 2 frets to the sharp 5, which is perfect for that sound, right? You hear that sound all the time, right? And that's just B minor's setup chord. So the chord progression for the whole thing is B minor, and I'll sing the melody too. So, ba-dum, 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 bum. Right, fits perfectly. And that too adds that nice little flavor at the end, at that last hit of the chord. So now that we have a chord progression and we have a melody that we know works with the chord in a certain way, a way that we like, it's so much easier to put an idea like this together because now we have the template of notes that we can play. So one common thing that a lot of people would do right off the bat is they would say, cool, let me just play the chords and the melody at the same time. That would be like this. I'll just strum the chords with the melody. So B minor, next chord, A, E minor, right, F sharp, and then B. Like, you can do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that is not really what we're doing here in this video. What we are doing is playing a part with multiple lines that are audible, all kind of doing their own thing, like multiple melodies, right? What I just played right there is more commonly known as a chord melody. And that's when you play a chord with a melody on top, hence chord melody, right? Really simple. Now, the thing about chord melodies is that they sound and function in a different way than what we're doing here in this power-up. A chord melody is pretty much like this. You have two elements. You have a chord and you have a melody. The chord is the foundation and the melody just sits on top of it, right? The chord is like a bed of notes that the melody can sit in and kind of get a context for how those notes work, right? If I just play these two notes, you have no real idea what those notes are actually doing, what they sound like. But the second I do it with a B minor, now they have context. You can say, oh, that's what those notes are supposed to sound like. That's the point of, really, it's the point of music, having harmony and a melody, and you can hear how the melody interacts with the notes of the chord. A chord melody is when you're just simply doing that, playing a chord and then playing a melody on top. What we want to do, though, is we want multiple melodies. And sometimes when you're doing a chord melody like this, it doesn't really sound like that. It just sounds like a chord and then a single melody. And the reason why is if you play a full chord like this, like a straight up B minor or B minor 7, there's a lot of stuff going on in there. So it's kind of hard to notice any little moving parts other than the part you're supposed to hear, the melody, because there's so much going on. So the easiest way to create this multiple melody sound is to simplify. So instead of playing the entire chord, B minor, A, E minor, F sharp, I'm going to just play the root notes of all of those chords and just the melody, and that's it. I'm not going to play anything else yet. Down the road I will. So that takes us to this. Instead of this big sound, again, nothing wrong with that. It takes us to this now. Right? It's simpler, it's thinner, but notice you can hear the individual parts way better. You can clearly hear this, the melody, and then you can hear the bass line happening at the same time again. It's a lot easier to identify those two moving parts, right? So that's all I'm doing, playing that same melody and playing the root notes of the chords. Remember the chords B minor, A, E, F sharp, B minor. So what I'm doing there is I'm playing starting the roots up top just to give it kind of a motion walking down, which is cool. So B, A, E, F sharp, B. That's my bass line melody while the top melody stays where it is, right? Then what we're going to do to spice it up a little more is add in another melody in between. We already have a top melody. We already have a bass line. So let's add a melody in between. Again, not difficult to do because we know the chord progression. All we have to do is pick notes in the middle that are going to work with the chords, and it's going to work with this whole thing, right? So I decided I want the middle melody to move in the same way, sort of, as the bass line. So the bass line is moving every two notes, right? Bam, 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 bam. That's what I want to do with the middle line as well. So how do I find the middle line? Well, the first chord, I'm already playing root in flat 3. So what's the other note I'm not playing? How about 5, right? The other note that makes up a B minor chord. And the 5 is right here. in the middle. So 1 and flat 3, and then in the middle of those two notes, we have a 5. That 5 lives in between those notes when I'm playing it like this. Perfect. So that means I've got this for the first chord. Instead of just bass line and melody, I now have a middle note as well. Hear that note? That's the beginning of my middle melody, right? So I thought, sweet, I've got that. What else can I do with this middle melody? I already know what the bass line is doing. I already know what the top melody is doing. What's the middle melody going to do? Now I could just do something like this. Right? I just move the middle melody like this. And I chose to not do that because that would be too similar to what the other melodies are doing. The other melodies are moving just down by either half step or whole step, right? Top melody is literally moving down half steps and whole steps, right? Just straight steps the entire way. The bass line is as well for those first two notes, down a whole step. I didn't really want the middle melody to also do that because that's, I don't know, I'm looking for something a little bit different. So instead of me trying to just randomly guess notes, I can say, well, what am I doing here? I was moving from the 5th of the B minor, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5th of B minor, and then I was just straight up moving to the 5th of the A, so moving it from a 5th to a 5th. So I thought, well, I can surely just go somewhere else. How about 5th to a 3rd? That would be this, 5th of B minor to the 3rd of the A chord. So that would give me a melody that has this, like a bigger jump to it. None of the other parts are doing that. So maybe that will allow that middle line to kind of stand out on its own. So that sounds like this. Right? So now the top melody, I'm still doing what it's doing. Bass line still doing what it's doing. But now the middle melody is going bum, bum. And I think it stands out a little bit better because it's doing something unique. It's making this big jump that neither of the other parts are doing. Again, I'll play it. Listen to that middle melody. While everything else is doing what it's doing, right? That's the thought process, right? You don't want to just play the easiest, most obvious choice. You want to think about, how can I make this note move to the next chord in a unique way so that it stands out? And then I do that exact same thing in the next chord. So I'm coming from here, the A. The next chord is E minor. So bass note is going to be here on the E. Melody is going to continue doing what it's doing that little move, flat 3 to 2 of E minor, right? What's the middle melody doing? The middle melody was here. It's now going to move up 1 fret to the flat 7 of the E minor. It's kind of like in my bar, so it's pretty easy to play, right? I like this option a lot because it's doing something, again, that neither of the other parts are doing. All of the other parts, the top melody and the bass line, are moving down this whole time, right? Melody, top, moving down the whole time. Bass line moving down the whole time. Until the F sharp, of course, but so far moving down. This middle melody, though, is moving up right there when we hit that E minor. So again, it's doing its own thing, which makes it easier to hear in context. So let me play that one more time. So listen to that middle melody. That sound is really cool because it's a little bit more noticeable, again, because it's doing its own thing. It's moving in its own direction. Okay, cool. So let's continue with the next one. We got the E minor right here. F sharp is the second to last chord. Middle melody bass, right? So that's the bass line here. The melody doing these two notes, the E, D, flat 7, sharp 5 of the F sharp right there. My middle melody, I kind of chose to move from here. So remember, middle melody was this. I'm now playing this note, right? The reason why, because I want this chord to be an obvious 5 of. And for this chord to be an obvious 5 of, I need to make it a dominant 7th. I've got a root, cool. I've got a flat 7, cool. So far, so good. I just need a 3 to really make that dominant 7th sound strong, and that's why I'm playing that note, the 3rd of the chord. So it sounds like this, right? We've got ring, middle, pinky, and then we lift the pinky, revealing the pointer finger right there, making this little staircase chord shape. And then that brings us to the final chord where the melody moves here, bass line moves down to the B right there, and then the middle melody moves to the F sharp. So the middle melody does this, kind of has this really angular walk down that none of the other chords kind of have, or none of the other notes, I should say, kind of have. So that's taken us all the way to the end to this final chord, right? So now that we have that, you can see my thought process. I have a chord progression, I have a melody in mind, but I want to put other things in there. Step 1, don't play the full chord, only play the root note, and then fill in a third melody with some other notes of the chord that help spell the shape out, but do it in a way that's interesting, that isn't doing the exact same motion as one of the other lines. So it's the main thing you want to think about when you're doing this, and it's really not that difficult to come up with, and it's actually a lot of fun once you kind of get it going. So this is part 1. part 2 and 3 are going to be the same thing, just more of it. So we'll get to those. But let's talk about real quick what I'm doing technically. This whole time, right hand's really easy. I'm using pick and fingers, and it's always exactly the same. The pick is handling the bass note, so it's literally just doing this. That's all it's doing. The middle finger is handling the middle melody, so it's always doing this. Middle finger, middle finger, middle finger, middle finger, middle finger, like that, always like that. And because the middle melody and the bass line are happening at the same time, my pick and middle finger are always working together. Always pick middle finger like that. So it looks like this, right? So the first one, next one, next one, next one, next one. So that's pick and middle finger always happening. The ring finger is handling the melody in its entirety. So the melody is being entirely played by the ring finger. So the ring finger is kind of working overtime in comparison to the other fingers, because the ring finger is constantly picking. That's ring finger all the time. Is this the best way? I don't know. It's completely up to you how you would want to do it. This is the way that just feels natural to me. So if I turn my hand a little bit, you can see a little better. Right, so that's kind of how I'm doing it. You can do it with different configuration. You can sneak in the pinky if you want to, if that's comfortable. You could do it straight finger style, like that. So thumbs handling the bass note. That's probably the easiest choice if you're not used to picking fingers. You can try strumming it if you want. It's a little bit harder because you got to do a lot more muting because you're playing strings that you might not want. And again, if you start strumming the whole chord, that defeats the purpose of this whole power up. We don't want to play a chord melody. We want to play individual melodies, 3 in this case, these multiple melodies happening. And the way to do that is to simplify and not to play too much. And then the final thing for this is going to be the fingering. You can see my fingering. I mean, if I talk about every single chord individually, what my fingers are doing, it's just going to add another 5 minutes to this video. So just take a look at my hand and just notice what I'm doing. I'm trying to move in the most, ergonomic way possible to connect the chords. It's really important when you are creating a fingering, especially for something like this that has multiple lines and, moving parts. You want to make sure that your fingering isn't just comfortable for the moment that you are playing in, right? Let's say I was doing something like this. Let's say I had the first melody, right? That. And let's say, yeah, this melody, really comfortable. I'm going to do it like this, right? Middle finger, pointer, pinky for the first 3, and then ring finger right there. You might say, cool, that fingering's perfect for this chord. It feels really comfortable. Great, let's move on. But then when you move to the A chord, you realize, oh, it's really hard to transition to this fingering, which is the most comfortable for the A chord, right? And again, I'm sure that you can make that comfortable, but it's just an example. So what I mean there is, even though this fingering was comfortable for this B minor, it's not comfortable transitioning into the next chord. You have to take into account the transitions. You cannot just get a comfortable fingering for that moment that you are currently practicing. You need to get a comfortable fingering to get into that moment and to get out of that moment into the next sound that you're playing, because then you're going to create a part that's really smooth. I often find this whenever I'm teaching, I often find this happening where students will practice a difficult part a lot and they'll get a great fingering, but because they're not practicing the transition in and out of that part, they realize like, oh crap, this fingering is really good for this, but it's not good for the next chord or the chord before it, right? So you have to make sure you're always getting into the part and out of the part with a comfortable fingering, so everything flows. So that what I'm doing here, it kind of looks like this, right? D string, B string, high E string, ring, pointer, pinky, pull the pinky back. Then watch this, my ring finger just moves back on the D string as well as my pinky. So I'm just kind of sliding these two. That's why I like this fingering. Middle finger goes down there for the middle melody. Now here I'm actually barring, even though I don't have to. You think, oh, this is actually a perfect example. You might play this fingering and think, yeah, this fingering is perfect, but I'm actually barring. You might say, why am I barring? There's no reason to bar when I can just go like that. Because what I'm doing is prepping for the next chord. Notice the next chord is a full bar starting on the A string and up, down to the B string. I'm prepping that bar before I get there, making it a lot easier. If I just played the high E string, which is fine, I'm playing my pointer finger right now up there. To get to the E minor, I have to immediately lift that finger and bar, right? And there's a chance I might not get there in time, especially because I have to play that bass note immediately. So I'm just prepping the bar beforehand. I'm already there. I've already got the bar there. There it is. So I just slide up 2 frets, ready to go. That's exactly what I'm talking about. This fingering, you might say that's the perfect fingering, comfortable. But again, because you're not practicing transitioning into the E minor, you won't realize that, oh, there's a big problem with this. And that pointer finger is the problem. It's not ready to bar to play the next chord. So that's why I'm doing that bar right there, right? And then the E minor, straight bar, middle finger right there. Then for the F sharp 7, that's ring finger, middle, pinky, right? And again, you might say, I'm going to play like this. Like that's easy to do that exact like snapshot of a chord. But again, this doesn't make sense because I need to play this note right here, right? So I'm going to play it like this with these 3 fingers, allowing my pointer finger to be free and hit that next note of the melody. That's probably the most awkward change right there. These. So I've got ring, middle, pinky, F sharp, A sharp, and then E. And then the pointer finger playing the D right there. And then I'm playing this. That's probably the most awkward change. It's not too bad, but it's a little tricky. Pointer finger moves back to here, the C sharp. Middle finger moves to the E string B. Pinky on the A string F sharp, playing the 5 of the chord. So I'll play that a couple more times. Check it out. Play a little slower. I'm also playing in kind of like short, those second hits are a little short. Which is kind of cool, gives it like almost like a Baroque classical feel, which is kind of neat. But yeah, that's the part. Again, experiment with fingering. You don't have to do this exact fingering. You don't have to do this exact finger pattern, but it works for me. So, check it out, see if it works for you. So this track is going to run from 80 to 100 BPM. I honestly don't really think this part sounds that great at high tempos, so I'm not really ever going to go super fast with it. I actually kind of like it at like 90 the whole time, personally. I think it sounds cool there, but for practice and for technique, the tracks do increase tempo like some of the other ones, so hopefully you'll find that enjoyable. Anyway, this track, again, is 80 to 100 BPM. The track also changes in dynamics. Sometimes it's very, very minimal. It's just like bass and drums, but then as the track continues, more stuff will come in, so try to adapt to that. Maybe in the soft parts, play soft, really soft. Maybe in the big parts where it's real heavy, kind of dig in, hold the notes a little longer to kind of bring out that element of the arrangement. I think that sounds pretty cool. So anyway, let's get on to that track. Again, we're running from 80 to 100 BPM. All right, that does it for part 1 of this multi-melody power-up. As usual, if you enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below, and I'll see you guys in part 2.